Hello and welcome to the Bonsai Garden. If you've been watching my videos regularly, you'll see that a couple of weeks back I made some new monkey poles and started making a new bench for my garden, and that bench now is finished. And the bench sits in what we call the tea garden part of the garden, and it's this upper courtyard area. And there we go. So it gives me a little bit more bench space just behind the fence. It's a slightly more shaded part of the garden that does get the sun in the evenings or late afternoon, but you can see we're getting some sun here. And I think things like this Japanese Acer will be quite happy in here. And here I am sat in the arbour looking the other way, enjoying the trees. You can see as I walk along the benches, several of the trees have already leafed out. So we've got here, for example, a trident maple. My plans for this, taking it forward, are to possibly air layer the tree at this point and get two trees, and have a tree in the lower half, which is quite a thick trunk, which has a couple of branches on this side and that side that are cascading down, and a tree at the top with a bit of taper in it. And that's a possible future plan for this particular tree, but I'm maybe going to leave it for a season and just see how it gets on. Immediately next to that, we've got the spectacular autumn colour on this Katsura Japanese maple, and it really is quite something. A really fiery, bright orange. Just behind that, we've got my tiny little corkscrew Disherja Japanese maple, and that's only just beginning to put out leaves now, and so it may be a month or so before we've got a bit of a show from this tree. Just behind that here, we've got a Korean hornbeam, and this is a new tree to me in about January, February time, and I've never seen this tree in leaf, so I'll be interested to see what that looks like. It's got a lot of ramification on it already, although the trunk is a little bit thin towards the bottom of the tree, and it may also need some of those branches actually removing to try and avoid any issues with inverse taper. You can see here that my larch trees are budding out. They've got the lovely little bright sort of brushes of green leaves larches are famous for come spring, and these will extend out over the coming season and probably need trimming back significantly a number of times throughout the year. It's usually a very vigorous grower. And just quickly scouting down the benches, I've got my cork bark Chinese elm root over rock. That is just beginning to put out some tiny leaves, and I'm expecting more of that over the next month. I've got here a dawn redwood, which is just beginning to open out the leaves on there. I've just noticed that this Picea spruce tree has also had a bit of a spurt of energy, and so I expect that to have a good season this year. It was replanted into this pot in spring, and perhaps that's what's reinvigorated it. It was probably one of the first trees that I replanted this season. Next to that, I've got a magnolia, which has been a bit slow. It hasn't done an awful lot yet this year, so just keep an eye on that. Behind that's my silver birch forest. Here's the tree that I transplanted into that to replace one which had died. It has got a little bud on the side of it here, so there is something happening within the tree. And what I want it to do at some point is to actually sprout out from the top here and develop like the other trees in the forest. Got another larch here, and behind that I've got some Kojo Nimai cherries. My chocolate birch tree at the back there. In here, this is an interesting tree. This is the lower half of a tree where I air layered the top, and it's a Paul's Scarlet Hawthorn tree. And I always felt that this tree was too twisty in the trunk for the size of the trunk, and I always felt that there was another tree in the top half of that tree, so I took that off, and that's now growing separately. And I'm waiting for that to put out substantial leaves and growth this year to see whether it survives on its own roots. The parent tree is fine, but it's a little bit of an ugly tree now, so I'm waiting to see what happens with this, and I may have to take this branch off and do something with the upper part of the tree so it doesn't look quite so ugly. In the corner here we've got a couple of Japanese maples, and my crabapple tree sat in front of it. That crabapple tree was grown from a whip grown from the Woodland Trust, and I'm still waiting for the year when it develops flowers, and I doubt that will be this year now. Up on the monkey poles at the back we've got my Atropurpureum Japanese maple forest. The buds are just beginning to open on that. In front of it is the Orange Dream. This is the tree where I had one of the trees die in the composition. So I just a couple of weeks back have replaced that with this new tree, and I'm going to see how that gets on. The colour at the moment is a slightly different colour from the bark on the other trees, but I think that will adjust and change over time. This is my Yama Momiji Japanese maple, looking beautiful at the moment with these very distinctive colours on the leaves. It's in its new pot. It was replanted into there about 3 weeks back. Just underneath that we've got the smallest of my Japanese white pines, a larch, Chinese elm, Cascade juniper, and just behind that is the lovely silver birch tree which I was given by Tony of Tony's Bonsai. Just taking in this table by the pond, I've got a number of trees on here. The first is this one, which is the largest of my Dishoja Japanese maples, just beginning to put out buds like the other one. Behind that is the Osmanthus tree, which was my $50 challenge tree. It's in a different pot because when we had the winds which damaged some of my pots about 6 weeks back, this one was one of the casualties, and so I've replanted that into a different pot. I'm actually happier with this pot, this unglazed pot. I think it suits it more. And you can see that this particular plant now has got some tiny little yellow flowers developing on there. Just in front of that is the azalea plant, which came from a garden centre and which spent a week or so at the bottom of the pond. It's a bit nondescript really. And behind that is a Mugo pine, which I just had growing in the garden. Again, that's another one that's a little bit nondescript, and what I had thought about doing was separating the trees out of there into some small pots and doing some really crazy wire bends on those, just to give them a bit of a reprieve and make them a little bit more interesting than they are. They're a bit leggy, they're a bit boring, the needles are a bit big, and it needs something doing with them if it's ever to be any kind of sensible bonsai tree. We did suffer some casualties here. The acacia tree in the garden we cut down because that appears to have died. Weirdly, the other one seems to have been perfectly fine. And that used to grow where my new monkey poles are now standing. And you can see there's a bit of a stump there which I need to take out. This tiny little cypress tree also seems to have struggled and died. It seems to have dried out. This tiny little dwarf azalea flowered last year, but has always looked a bit sickly and unwell in all the time I've had it in the last 2 years. So I'm watching to see whether it flowers this year. If it does, I'm probably going to replant it into some ericaceous soil, some Canuma. Of my small trees, this Cateniaster has also not looked very happy since about October, November time, and I'm fairly certain that one has died too. Everything else out here is looking happy. I hope you found some of that useful or interesting. If so, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to be notified of future videos. Hope to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.